Welcome back. You're watching Bloomberg Quint. Demonetization, GST, higher commodity prices and slower GDP growth. The headwinds are many, yet consumer spending seems to be holding up. But will it sustain? To get you a big picture view of the economy, business and consumer spending, we're joined today by Mariwala, the chairman of Marico. Mr. Mariwala, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us today on Bloomberg Quint. Let me start by asking you to characterize the current state of the economy, sir. From where you sit, what do things look like to you?
See, I think from two angles I look at the economy. One is the Marico angle and the impact of GST demonetization on our own business, and another is what I hear from others in the industry. And clearly, both these initiatives have had, shall I say, more severe impact than what we had imagined. And we are still coming out of the GST implementation. As far as Marico is concerned, I think the negative impact is more in the wholesale business and in rural areas. But when I talk to some smaller and medium-sized industry owners, I realize that the impact is much more on them. And it's really worrying at one level because we thought we had enough time to implement GST, and a lot of work had gone in terms of identifying what could be the glitches, but it looks like I think there has been a setback to the economy because of the GST implementation. Hopefully this will be a short-lived one, and the government is actually actively trying to address the issues.
Mr. Mariwala, I don't mean to make this an earnings conversation at all, but I'm just trying to understand what is the extent of the setback, because we've just come out of a quarter that saw fairly poor growth, much lower than anticipated, and we're all trying to understand whether this will continue over the next few quarters. At least from your business point of view, can you give me a sense of what the GST hit has been like in numbers?
See, I can't give you the exact numbers. I don't handle day-to-day, but I think in case of larger companies, the impact is much lesser. The impact was more in the month of June prior to GST launch. It's much lesser in this quarter. In fact, except for these two sectors, which is wholesale and rural, I think things are back to normal. So I would say that we will return back to a growth trajectory in this quarter. But I think the impact is much more for smaller and medium-sized industries, and that's where there is a higher worry in terms of what will happen to them.
Any way to quantify that? I mean, I know that the formalization of the economy, thanks to both demonetization and GST, might help large companies like yours. That has been the commentary with all top business leaders that we've spoken to so far. But a sense, or how do we get to know the depth of the problem in the wholesale and rural industries, in the informal segments of the economy?
I think we have to wait and watch and see, is this impact transitionary, or it's likely to be more long-term. And to some extent, it will be a combination of both. So let's wait and watch for a period of 1 or 2 months. But from what I hear from many players, that their sales are down in this quarter by almost 30 to 50%. In our case, it's higher than last quarter, so it's okay. But for whatever reason, I don't know, it's transitional in nature or it's a permanent impact. I'm not able to predict. I'm not a part of that size of industry, so difficult for me to say whether it's transitionary or it's permanent. But the impact is much more there.
Mr. Mariwala, good afternoon. This is Ira joining in from the studio as well. Can you give us a little bit of an idea about what's happening in the rural market in particular, sir? I'm curious to know whether, all of that talk about stress on the farm sector, has that died down or does that persist? Is that then sort of spiraling forward into demand impact in the rural economies?
See, it's very difficult to predict because the discontinuity is not giving a true and fair picture of what is happening. So to some extent, rural demand is getting impacted because of the GST transition. So I'm not able to clearly identify, is there a demand issue or is it a GST issue, and within GST again it's a transition issue, or it's a permanent impact because of GST.
Is there an impact also on supply chains, sir?
But I'm quite hopeful things will look up in the next quarter.
Sure. No, so
No, I'm quite hopeful things will look up in the next quarter, especially for larger companies.
Sure. So any indications of a disruption in the
please go
supply chain, sir? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Yeah, you know, as I said earlier, because of the transition nature, there is an impact in wholesale areas, and because of wholesale services, the smaller mom and pop shops. So in those kind of outlets, there will be some impact in terms of supply chain, but not in terms of other sectors like large scale or big retailers. I mean, it's actually they would be doing much better because they will earn at the cost of some smaller players.
Mariwala, just a question about commodity prices as well. What's been the impact like? You've been facing high copra price inflation for a while. How has that affected your input costs?
Yes. Well, copra is the main raw material for our parachute coconut oil, which is our biggest selling product. And to that extent, the inflation would impact us. But luckily, we had a good long position. We had some stock which we built up, but nonetheless, in spite of that, I think there will be impact because of the fact that the raw material prices have really shot up a lot in the last few months.
So just to try and piece all of this together, sir, you know, you're saying that your firms like yours have benefited. In fact, this has been a good quarter. You pointed out you expected growth will be higher from your point of view, you know, and yet whilst on the other hand you are dealing with commodity prices. So how do you sort of, you know, qualify what the next few months will look like in terms of profitability and margins?
See, I don't handle the day-to-day, shall I say,
I don't mean specific. I'm just trying to understand the health of the business.
I'm not able to.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to understand the health of businesses. I'm not trying to ask for specific.
So I think we should. See, I think overall, I'm quite hopeful that the team will do a good job in terms of driving top-line growths and also ensuring that the bottom line is at least not very highly impacted by the inflation.
Sir, the other question that, you know, I think has been playing out for the last several days now is the potential need for some sort of stimulus or some sort of government boost to the economy. What you've characterized as stress on the wholesale economy, maybe some stress on the rural parts of the economy, supply chains. But on the other hand, there are large firms like yours that are benefiting. So if it's getting balanced out, do you see at this point in time the need for any kind of government extra intervention?
See, I think if you look at the GDP trajectory and the trend in the last, whatever, 1.5 years, it's going down every quarter, which is not a good thing. Partly it may be because of demonetization, partly because of GST. So I think one has to see whether is it a temporary blip or it's more fundamental and structural in nature. And if it is structural, then there is a cause for worry. There is a need to bring in some stimulus package. We are also now coming closer to the next election, so that also is one factor, I'm sure, which is playing in the minds of the governing party. So I think we have to wait and watch, but an investment-led kind of a stimulus package will take its own time in terms of growth impact on the GDP. But I think a consumption-led stimulus package would be a little bit more, shall I say, short-term in nature, and will have a impact in the short term, better impact in the short term compared to investment-led stimulus package.
Mr. Mariwala, though, I think, you know, we've paid the price in the past for these consumption-led stimulus packages, you know, unless it's very well timed in terms of introduction and then, you know, withdrawing. Would even the consumer industry be actually cautious? Because, you know, we finally got a fix on this inflation problem, at least to some extent. Surely the industry doesn't want that problem to resurface either.
Yeah, you're right, but I think maybe at the most, if the government is able to target properly and with all the IT and Jandan and other, if there's better targeting in rural areas amongst the poorer, I think that may help. I think you need to give a package which is very well targeted and at the same time ensure that it doesn't lead to a huge increase in fiscal deficit as well as inflation.
Mr. Mariwala, I had one question on investment as well. I mean, I think everybody looks at the capacity utilization numbers and says that, obviously there perhaps isn't an immediate impetus for private industry to invest. But I'm wondering if one needs to actually, look at individual segments. Say, for instance, if you look at consumer industries, consumer demand has been relatively strong for a while. Do you think there could be some sort of room for investment coming in from the consumer segment of private industry? For instance, I'd love to know what kind of capacity utilization your companies are running at, sir.
See, I think if consumer companies, even if there is capitalization or there is increased investments, the overall size of investments in FMCG industry is not very high. I think our major investment is in marketing, advertising, sales promotion, distribution. So even if we invest more, if we are falling short of capacity, I would think that it will not lead to a spur in the overall economic growth rate. I don't have the exact numbers in terms of our capacity utilization as of now.
Sure.
Okay, I just wanted to take it back, sir, to the point that you made about some sort of targeted, relief to, let's say, the rural economy or to consumers. Any ideas on what you think or what you'd expect the government to do? Because how would they put this money in the hands of the right consumers? Any thoughts on this? Have you all brainstormed? Has industry sent any suggestions into government on this at all?
Not really.
Not really?
No, I don't think so. But I think from what I read, no, I don't have much clue. But I think if there was a better targeting of what the government did on Narega kind of schemes with a far more higher quality implementation, then money would go straight away into the rural households in the near future whenever this began. And it will have an impact on the overall demand in that sector.
Okay, so you're fairly confident that you will see consumer demand strengthen or continue to stay strong over the next few quarters, at least the end of this fiscal. From your point of view, that end of the economy is still holding up, correct?
I would not call it strong. I would say that it's coming back to better than the last quarter and better than the last 8-9 months. Strong would be a relatively, I would say it's a much stronger word, but I think it's getting back to a little more higher growth rates compared to what we've seen in the economy, So hopefully that should start reflecting in a higher GDP growth rate in the next quarter.
Okay, I just have one final question. You've spoken of the many macro pressures and the GST or restructuring reform pressures. There's one more pressure, and that's the Patanjali pressure. I don't think they compete with you in too many categories, maybe one or two. You were quoted in one interview as saying, according to you, it's the most overhyped brand in the country. What do you make of this sweep or move towards, natural Ayurveda-led products and, how that's playing out right now in India?
See, I think firstly, they are present in virtually each and every category of FMCG products. So if you look at our basket of products, they are virtually there in cooking oils, hair oils. They are in oats, they are in savory oats. So to say that they are not competing with us is a wrong thing. Number two is they seem to be succeeding more in categories where there is a closer fit with their brand, the way it is associated. So think categories like honey, ghee, even in toothpaste, and a few other categories, they've had a much higher market share. In our categories, in hair care, for example, they have, I think, close to 1 or 2% market share. So as of today, if you look at the kind of market share they've been able to gather, it's not too much of a threat. But that doesn't mean that we should take them lightly. We have to ensure that we are able to maintain our market share, then they're not able to clip away at our shares.
Why did you think it was the most overhyped brand in the country?
No, because it is being talked a lot, whenever you go out socially. Then everybody asks about Patanjali, so, it becomes, whether it's a party or whether it's a business meeting, this is one question which comes up again and again. So, I mean, I'm not denying that they have done well within a short period of time, but in many sectors, they have not really gathered the momentum compared to some other categories where they've done well.
So there was some recent research by Kantar World
Also
Panel.
in terms of there's one more thing I want.
Please go ahead.
Sorry?
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
No. One other thing which I wanted to point out was that, they've been making certain claims which are exaggerated claims, and I think the courts have given a verdict in 2 or 3 cases against them. Hindustan Lever filed a case against them, Reckitt filed a case against them, Dabur filed a case against them, and all these 3 parties have won. And I'm sure that many, based on these wins, many other players will also not hesitate to file a case against them for making exaggerated claims.
Do you have any legal action pending against them?
I don't know. I think we'll see. I think the team has to decide whether is it worthy enough to file a case or it's not.
I just had one last question on Patanjali, and that is that there was some recent research that suggested that the brands penetrated about 55% of urban households, or rather 55% of urban households used the company's products as of July. That's up from 33% a year ago, and that rural penetration had doubled to 27%. But you're suggesting that is yet, in all categories, it doesn't pose as much of a threat.
In certain categories, they're done well, especially in ghee and honey and a few others, Ayurvedic categories and maybe toothpaste. But barring that, I have not seen the kind of impact which has made the current players really shake up and take them. I mean, they've not shaken up the current players. It's not as strong. When you have a market share of 1 or 2 or 3%, then it's not that big enough to impact you if you in the field.
All right, Mr. Mariwala, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for speaking with us and for that view on the economy. Harsh Mariwala, Chairman at Marico, speaking to us here at Bloomberg Quint. With that, shall we wrap it up?
Yes.
All right, thanks very much for watching.